Chapter 485. Wilbur was speechless for a long while, and Sammy was trembling slightly like a flower awaiting the destruction of an impending storm. She was nervous and a bit scared, yet slightly excited. The mix of emotions confused her too. She wondered what the hell she was doing. He got up at that moment and pulled the covers on her. He smiled and said, "I have to cultivate, so you should rest. We have a big day tomorrow. Rest well." With that said, he went to the living room. She finally noticed that his clothes were still on. She felt both embarrassed and disappointed at the same time. She pulled the covers over herself and felt her body burning hot. Wilbur meditated for a night in the living room. Sammy did not come out until 11 in the morning. He smiled and said, "We should get going." She walked out slowly, and her face was red like an apple. "Let's go," he said. She nodded shyly. However, Wilbur said, "I need to change my appearance. Don't get weirded out." With that said, he used his spirit energy to transform into the appearance of Trevor Penn. Sammy looked shocked and amazed. He said, "This will be the face I use at the press conference. You may call me Trevor Penn." She was shocked, but she knew that he did not want to draw nationwide attention, so she nodded along. After that, they washed up and got ready before driving to the Caesar Hotel. They arrived at the banquet hall through the elevator. The banquet hall was on the 97th floor, and the decor was extremely glamorous. The fees were calculated by the hour, and it was not cheap. The banquet hall was filled with well-known business figures and journalists of all sorts at the moment. It was quite crowded. Everyone was discussing the news with excitement. It was quite the breaking news for them. The celebrity's best friend had a fallout, and a nationwide press conference to apologize was held. That kind of gossip was likely to stay on the trending topics for a long time. Magnus was with Rhea and a few Zealand show business experts in the front row. They were smug. He kept waving and smiling into the camera. The broadcast went live a long time ago. The popularity of various live streaming rooms was steadily increasing. The enthusiasm of the audience was not to be underestimated. They saw Sammy clung to Wilbur by the arm and walked into the banquet hall slowly around 12 o'clock. Almost every camera pointed at them the moment they were seen. The constant flashlights almost blinded Wilbur. They walked toward the stage after getting used to the flashing lights. Magnus looked at the stranger next to Sammy and frowned slightly. "That person is clearly not the sucker from yesterday. Regardless, I have Dame Chandon, so I'm not scared of what tricks she might try to pull," thought Magnus. She went to the side of the stage with Wilbur. Rhea covered her mouth to laugh and said, "Hey, you found yourself another sucker. Did you serve him well last night?" "Rhea Quinn, don't cross the line," Sammy growled angrily. Rhea smirked and said in a voice filled with disdain, "Did you dump that sucker after he spent $1 billion on you? You're simply amazing. These suckers just keep coming, right?" "Watch your mouth, Rhea. It'll look bad if you embarrass yourself later," said Wilbur nonchalantly. Rhea chuckled and said, "I can't believe you guys are fighting for a little bitch like her. You're just someone who picks up trash. How dare you scold me? You better watch it." Chapter 486. Magnus stood and walked towards them. He said coldly, "Don't play any tricks, Sammy Chandon. Don't forget about your brother." Wilbur replied, "Huh. High society individuals often engage in lowbrow activities." "What the fuck did you just say?" Magnus stepped toward Wilbur and glared at him. Sammy said, "Mr. Ray, this is Mr. Trevor Penn. He's my spokesperson. You better be polite if you want me to apologize." Magnus instantly glared at her, but he quickly laughed it off and said, "Fine. Let's begin. I believe everyone can't wait for this to start." Then, he went back to his seat. However, he was thinking about how to torture that guy after the press conference. Magnus scoffed coldly and waved at the host. The host was also an artist under Zealand Entertainment. She instantly walked up to the podium and said into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and dear journalists, hello." Everyone instantly stopped talking. They looked towards the stage and waited for the show to start. The host smiled and said slowly, "Regarding Miss Sammy Chandon and the false accusations against Zealand Entertainment artist, Miss Rhea Quinn, we have reached an agreement. Miss Sammy Chandon acknowledges the false accusations and has held this press conference to offer an apology. She also offered a certain amount for compensation. This is why we've invited everyone here to bear witness. Now, please welcome Miss Sammy Shandon to the stage." Everyone laughed and shook their heads. The Shandons had a bit of fame in Zealand. Sammy was a newcomer that people thought would be a huge star back then. However, none of them expected Sammy to fall from grace in a short amount of time. She ended up having to hold a press conference to apologize to her best friend and also pay compensation. This is a nationwide live broadcast. Once Sammy Shandon confesses and apologizes in person, not only her career will be ruined, but going out in public will also be shameful. Her reputation would be tarnished nationwide, and she might have to hide her face when she goes out, they thought. Sammy blushed, but only because she was furious. However, Wilbur took the initiative to hold her arm. He whispered, "Don't be scared. I'm right here." She took a deep breath and nodded. She walked to the podium while holding his arm and stood in front of the microphone. The host stood on the side, smirking all the while. Rhea also looked smug. She stared at Sammy provocatively. Magnus had a cold gaze. He stayed silent. Sammy said slowly, "Regarding the matter concerning me and Rhea Quinn, I would like to invite my spokesperson, Mr. Trevor Penn, to provide an explanation on my behalf." Everyone was surprised. Why does she sound like she isn't going to apologize? They wondered. Magnus looked displeased. Wilbur stood in front of the microphone at that moment. He smiled and looked at everyone. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me make a statement. The rumors regarding Miss Sammy Shandon making false accusations and rumors against Miss Rhea Quinn are completely baseless. It is, in fact, Miss Rhea Quinn, who used despicable means to threaten her best friend, Miss Sammy Shandon. Sammy's brother, Dom Shandon, was illegally detained by Miss Rhea Quinn, who leveraged the power of Zealand Entertainment and colluded with Mr. Magnus Ray. This is a crime, and I urge everyone to bring this matter to light." His statement instantly caused a buzz. Plot twist? Is this a plot twist? A hidden truth? They wondered. The journalists immediately felt their passion burn brightly. They were screaming for Wilbur to get into the details. Rhea instantly became furious. She was trembling in anger. Magnus stood up abruptly and pointed at Wilbur. He said, "How dare you accuse us? Shouldn't you think of the consequences?" "What's this? Are you threatening me?" asked Wilbur with a smile. Chapter 487. Magnus' expression turned dreadful. However, he sneered coldly and said, "You said that Rhea threatened Sammy. What evidence do you have? If you don't have the evidence, it only goes to show that the accusations made against Rhea Quinn by Sammy Shandon are nothing but lies. You're rambling nonsense to divert attention." Magnus clearly knew about the curse. However, he knew that no one would believe it. Therefore, Trevor Penn had no evidence to provide. The fact that Sammy had defamed Rhea would be further solidified without evidence. He wondered how Wilbur would respond. Magnus had to applaud himself for his quick wit. Wilbur replied slowly, "Both Sammy and Rhea were signed to Zealand Entertainment back then. Rhea was afraid that Sammy would outshine her, so she took a necklace and found a witchcraft practitioner, Moose Chet. She asked Moose Chet to place a curse on the necklace. After that, she gave this cursed necklace to Sammy. From then on, Sammy experienced a streak of bad luck, and things didn't go well for her. They used to be best friends, so Rhea Quinn's actions can only be described as extremely malicious." The journalists were fired up. Wow, this guy brought witchcraft into the picture. This news is getting more and more sensational, they thought. They also looked forward to Magnus' reply. They hoped that the story would become more mysterious. As the more supernatural it got, the more it would capture people's attention. Magnus laughed and said, "How ridiculous. What witchcraft? Do you think people nowadays still believe in these things? Do you think everyone here is an idiot?" The cameras were locked on Wilbur as they waited for his reply. Wilbur chuckled and said, "Right. You can say that witchcraft is ridiculous, but whether it exists or not, Rhea Quinn did it. It can be described as an unforgivable act. I can contact the practitioner, Moose Chet, right now. We can video call him if necessary and let him explain the detailed process of how Rhea Quinn asked him to place the curse, as well as provide the transaction details she sent to him." Magnus felt his smile gradually freeze on his face. He looked extremely awful. They knew it was the truth. Wilbur could make a video call and let Darlene Chancellot reveal the details of what happened at that time. It would be difficult for people not to question whether Rhea had actually done it. Everyone might not believe in witchcraft, but they believed the act itself was very despicable. Negative news could cause the downfall of a star. Zealand was never merciful against artists with negative news. Also, Wilbur did not seem like he was lying based on his calm demeanor and the mention of Moose Chat. Perhaps he had evidence. It could be over for Rhea if he made a video call or had a voice recording. Magnus would be dragged down too. He spent a lot of money to make Rhea famous over the past few years, so he would not allow that to happen. Countless cameras were pointing at Magnus and Rhea for their reply. Rhea was cold in her limbs from anger, and she was turning pale. She glared at Wilbur and Sammy, and she wanted to skin them alive. Magnus was thinking fast in his mind about how to reply. However, Wilbur continued to say, "Not only do we have Moose Chat, but we also personally went to Molland and found his mentor, Darlene Chancellot. We also worked with the local authorities to address the situation with Moose Chat and his mentor, Darlene Chancellot. I can also provide the contact information for the captain of the Special Forces Squad who was involved in handling this matter if anyone is interested." Just to satisfy everyone's curiosity. Every journalist was taken aback when Wilbur said that. It did not seem fake because the authorities were involved. After all, lies like that could be busted through a simple call. Chapter 488. Therefore, a lot of journalists fought to speak and asked Wilbur for contact information. However, Wilbur smiled and said, "Please quiet down, everyone. We will provide the contact information of Darlene Chancellot and the captain of the Special Forces Squad for everyone to seek confirmation." Everyone was leaning towards Wilbur and Sammy at that point. They sounded confident after all, and Magnus and Rhea have yet to make any retorts. Magnus saw that things were getting out of control, so he said loudly, "Sammy Chandon, I don't know where you found this psycho. Spreading baseless accusations here won't help you. Let me tell you this, the consequences of defaming Rhea and Zealand Entertainment are something you can't bear. Starting to threaten again because you can't defend yourself?" Wilbur smirked mockingly, and he even lit a cigarette on the podium to start smoking. The business big shots in the audience turned serious. They were afraid that Zealand Entertainment would become a joke if the press conference was not handled right. There were a few big shots who owned enterprises under Zealand Enterprise. They were there to support Magnus, and they looked anxious. They were afraid that Zealand Enterprise would be affected if there was a scandal in Zealand Entertainment. They had a lot to lose. Magnus clenched his jaw. At that moment, he wanted nothing more than to tear Trevor Penn to shreds. He did not expect Sammy to find someone like him when he had Dom Chandon in his hand. He also could not believe that they would say something so outrageous. Do they want Dom Chandon to die? He wondered. However, he could not allow things to escalate to that point. Magnus instantly said, "Everyone, Sammy Chandon and her spokesperson are defaming my enterprise. The artist under my enterprise will never apologize. As of now, we are preparing to file a lawsuit to resolve this matter through legal means. Today's press conference will conclude here, so everyone can leave." The journalists were fired up, so they were not willing to leave. They screamed questions for Magnus to reply and for Wilbur to offer contact information or evidence. The press conference was a loud mess at the moment. Magnus sneakily waved, and several security guards rushed out from the side and ushered the journalists out. Some businessmen realized that things were taking a turn for the worse at that point. Not wanting to get involved, they discreetly left the scene. Only Magnus, Rhea, a few businessmen of Zealand Entertainment, and a few business big shots of Zealand Enterprise were left in the banquet hall. Magnus ordered the security guards to block the entrance. He glared at Wilbur and said angrily, "You're too audacious." "I've always been audacious," joked Wilbur. Magnus looked displeased. He stated coldly, "I take it that you don't want Dom Chandon to go home then?" "How dare you touch my brother?" yelled Sammy. Magnus laughed and asked, "What's the matter?" "I will make him suffer a horrifying death for what you did today. You two will be included too." There were no journalists or outsiders around anymore, so Magnus started to threaten them. Sammy was turning red from her anger, and her hands trembled. However, Wilbur asked, How about you give it a try? I double dare you. Gary, yelled Magnus angrily. The ambience level cultivator, Gary, walked next to him. Chapter 489. Magnus shot Wilbur an icy cold look. He told Gary, cripple him. Then lock him and that bitch Sammy Shandon up with Dom Shandon. I'm going to have my fun with them. Right. We can't show them any mercy. These bitches pissed me off so badly, yelled Rhea on the side. She thought it was going to be a publicity-boosting press conference that would allow her to gain significant attention. She did not expect the press conference to end like that. She almost lost her composure on the spot. She would have scratched Sammy in the face if she did not care about her image. Gary said, Mr. Ray, please step back. All of you should keep a safe distance. Magnus scoffed coldly. He led Rhea and the others somewhere around 10 meters away. Suddenly, Gary growled, and his spiritual energy surged. A trident ghost blade instantly appeared in his hand. Then, he said in a low voice, Trevor Penn, you dared act so outrageously. I suppose you have tricks up your sleeve. Bring it on. You're better off not humiliating yourself with those lame skills, mocked Wilbur. His words instantly pissed Gary off. He looked displeased, yelling back, you don't know your place, young man. You're asking for it. The enraged Gary activated the spiritual energy within his body, and spiritual energy surged outward from him. The trident ghost blade was ignited in spiritual flames and caused a powerful spiritual pressure to spread across the banquet hall. The hall was instantly filled with rampant spiritual energy, and a fierce wind howled. Many tables and chairs were overturned. They rolled around in all directions. Everyone's clothes were rustling in the strong gusts of wind. Magnus laughed when he saw what Gary did. He backed away again with Rhea, who was looking smug. They stared at Wilbur and Sammy in disdain. Step up and face your doom. Gary held weapons in his hands as he pointed at Wilbur. Wilbur chuckled and leaped down the podium. He clenched his right fist, and it instantly lit up in spiritual flames. He stepped toward Gary. The spiritual flames on his fist were roaring, causing a spiraling wind to form around him. Gary was taken aback. When Wilbur stepped forward, there were many runes on the spiritual flames. A terrifying spiritual pressure instantly overwhelmed Gary. Gary panicked and defended himself with all of his spiritual energy. When Wilbur stepped forward, the spiritual flames on his fist formed into the shape of a dragon's head. A roaring spiritual pressure started to rampage in the hall. Gary was overpowered by the spiritual pressure. Magnus and the others also looked pale in the face. Wilbur took his fifth step forward. By then, he was only a few meters away from Gary. He threw a punch that instantly caused the situation to change drastically. A terrifying sense of crisis overwhelmed Gary, leaving him in a state of shock and fear. The power in that punch was far from his expectations. Gary panicked and roared to activate everything he had. He used all of his spiritual energy to wave his blade with sheer thoughts of survival. His trident ghost blade was shattered into pieces with the sound of a dragon roar. It scattered into spiritual energy that dispersed in all directions. Gary himself flew backward for over 10 meters while spitting out blood. He crashed hard into a wall behind him, leaving a huge dent from the impact. Then, he fell to the ground unconscious. It was unknown whether he was still alive. Magnus and the others were horrified to see the blood left by Gary on the floor. They looked at Wilbur with horrified faces. They could not believe that Gary, who was a peak ambience level cultivator, was knocked unconscious with just a single attack. The scene before them was just way too terrifying. Chapter 490. Wilbur scoffed coldly and waved with his hand. Magnus was pulled in by a tremendous force, and the next thing he knew, he was in Wilbur's grasp. Wilbur snapped one of his legs without waiting for him to speak. Magnus screamed in pain. Just before Wilbur snapped one of his arms, Magnus cried out once more, almost passing out from the pain. Wilbur tossed him to the floor, then looked at Rhea and the others with a cold gaze. Rhea was frightened. She covered her mouth and trembled in a corner. The big shots of the Zealand Enterprise also looked horrified. They did not know what to do. Wilbur said slowly, "This is what happens when you abuse your power. Remember, there are many people who are more powerful than you in this world. Trash like you means nothing to me." Wilbur was extremely bossy to say that, yet no one there dared to make a squeak. They were fearing for their lives. Wilbur saw that no one spoke, so he lifted Magnus again. He told Magnus, who was barely conscious, "Bring Dom Chandon here immediately. If anything is missing from his body, your body will be missing something too. All of you will be buried with him if he's dead." "Yes, of course. I'll get Dom here right away." Magnus was scared out of his wits. He did not dare to be arrogant, so he agreed to everything. Wilbur scoffed coldly and said, "I want my $1 billion back with interest. That's $2 billion in total. Make sure it's ready for me. I'll kill you if a single dollar is missing." $2 billion? Exclaimed Magnus. Wilbur looked displeased. He asked coldly, "What? Is that too much to ask? I remembered that I told you my money isn't easy to earn." Magnus did not dare argue at that point. He had no choice but to say, "Sir, I'll bring Dom over right away, but I need time to prepare $2 billion. I don't have that much cash." Zealand Entertainment was an asset worth billions, but that was the worth of the enterprise. $1 billion in cash was not easy to retrieve. Wilbur scoffed coldly and tossed Magnus onto the floor. He said coldly, "I'll wait right here. I hope I don't wait too long. I'll be in a bad mood if I wait too long. Someone will be unfortunate if I'm in a bad mood." "Yes, yes. Right away." Magnus hurriedly took his phone out to make calls without hesitation. Wilbur walked up to Sammy and pulled her into a seat at a table. He smiled faintly at her. Sammy could not describe how much she admired him at that moment. "So, this is power. How fascinating it is for a man to have absolute power. Now that I think about it, this was Wilbur's intricate plan from the start. He agreed to give Magnus $1 billion and to hold an apology press conference. Then, he fought back Magnus and Rhea during the press conference and provoked Magnus on purpose so that Magnus would resort to violence. He utilized his formidable combat skills to intimidate Magnus, then demanded my brother's release. He also demanded his money back, along with interest." Awesome. This is so awesome. Indeed, this kind of prowess is entirely built upon his formidable strength. And only someone like Wilbur Penn could effortlessly execute such a striking counterattack, she thought. Sammy was looking at Wilbur like a total fangirl. Wilbur was slightly embarrassed by the way she was staring at him with admiration. The hall was dead silent. Wilbur did not forbid them to leave, but no one dared to move an inch. They were afraid to draw attention from him. Everyone felt like they were in immense danger. The tension was high. It had been only half an hour, but Rhea and the others felt like a century had passed. They endured the suffering, and just when they were about to hit their limit, someone suddenly opened the banquet hall door. Chapter 491. Everyone sighed in relief at the same time for unknown reasons. They felt like they were on the verge of suffocation and were suddenly given a breath of fresh air. They could finally breathe again. Dom Chandon appeared in the hall under the escort of two men. "Dom!" Sammy ran over and cried. She hugged her brother and checked to see if he was hurt. Dom smiled softly and caressed her head, comforting her. "I'm fine. Don't worry." Sammy saw that he only had minor scratches, so she finally relaxed. She wiped her tears and said, "Mr. Penn is here. He's right there." Sammy pointed at Wilbur. Dom also guessed that Sammy asked for his help. Otherwise, Magnus would not release him just like that. Magnus did say he would not be alive without $1 billion after all. He knew that his family would not have $1 billion unless they sold every asset owned by the Chandons to Magnus. However, he could not recognize Wilbur. He was baffled and wondered if his sister managed to hire another person with the same last name. Sammy whispered into his ear. Mr. Penn changed his appearance. He did not want to show his face in front of the journalists. Realization dawned on Dom. He was not surprised that Wilbur could change his appearance at all. Wilbur was like a god to him, after all. Then, he brought his sister to stand in front of Wilbur. He bowed and said, "Sorry to trouble you again, sir. I really don't know how to repay you." "Don't worry. We're all friends here," Wilbur responded while laughing. Dom sighed and said, "I was too naive. I thought I could seek justice when we uncovered the truth. Damn it. Justice will come. It's being served right now, isn't it?" Wilbur stated calmly. Dom sighed again. "I'm not sure if I can survive this without Wilbur, let alone seek justice. The survival of my family is also uncertain without his help. At the end of the day, I was too naive. This is also a valuable lesson for me. There are rules at play in this world, and those who control these rules are individuals like Wilbur Penn. These individuals are much more powerful than people with money, Dom pondered. Magnus, who was lying on the floor, begged for mercy. He said, "Sir, I released the hostage. Let me return your $1 billion. Please allow me 3 days to gather another $1 billion for you. I will get the money, and I will transfer it into your account in time." "All right, I'll give you 3 days. But on one condition," said Wilbur slowly. Magnus hurriedly said, "Please tell me, sir." "Blacklist Rhea Quinn if she dares to appear on the big screen again. Zealand Entertainment will face bankruptcy and will be closed down." "You'll be doomed too," said Wilbur coldly. Rhea instantly went pale. She looked at Magnus pitifully. However, Magnus said without hesitation, "Don't worry, sir. It won't just be from this moment on. We'll cancel the show she used to be involved in, and the current album she's about to release. We'll also terminate her contract, and she'll never be hired again." Rhea rolled her eyes and instantly fainted when she heard that. She did all that she could to get to this point. She had put in a lot of effort. She found people to support her behind the scenes, and she secretly slept her way up to the top. She wondered how many partners she had slept with to get to her current position. She could not believe that she was getting blacklisted. There was no way she could handle that. Sammy felt great satisfaction at that moment. She used to treat her ex-best friend with sincerity. Rhea came from a humble background, and Sammy paid quite a lot of money for her back then just to get Rhea into Zealand Entertainment. Chapter 492. She could not believe that her best friend did something malicious to her in the end because she was afraid of competition. It broke her heart. Sammy felt like she got her revenge now that Rhea ended up getting blacklisted. She felt more than great. Wilbur laughed at that moment, then got up and left with Sammy and Dom. Magnus took on a malicious attitude after they left. He yelled, "Trevor Penn and Sammy Chandon, I swear I'll kill you both." Wilbur and the siblings went back to the hotel. The Chandon siblings kept thanking Wilbur, and it made him feel slightly embarrassed. Sammy told her brother, "I agreed to give Mr. Penn half of the Chandon Enterprise stocks. You don't have a problem with that, do you?" Dom was the CEO of Chandon Enterprise. After all, she had to inform him. Dom immediately replied, "Of course not. I'm more worried that Mr. Penn wouldn't accept it. It's really not necessary. I earned a lot this time. I don't need your stocks," Wilbur said with a laugh. However, Dom said with all seriousness, "Sir, it is our honor if you became a stockholder of Chandon Enterprise. You're not taking advantage of us because this is a huge deal for us. You must accept it." Dom finally understood something from the last incident. He felt like he could never be successful without strong support. He could be crushed and face bankruptcy at any given moment. However, they would not need to be afraid anymore once Wilbur was involved in Chandon Enterprise. It would be great news for Chandon Enterprise, so he would not miss out on the opportunity. Wilbur shook his head and rejected their offer. However, the Chandon siblings kept begging him, and Wilbur eventually accepted it in the end. With that done and dusted, Dom reserved a table at the hotel because he wanted to get drunk with Wilbur. Wilbur gladly agreed and they went to the restaurant. It was night time. Magnus had casts on his arm and leg. He was pushed in a wheelchair to the city center, arriving at the front of an independent courtyard. Zealand was a place where every inch of land was precious, so having an independent courtyard in the city center demonstrated how wealthy and powerful the owner was. A property like that could not be owned with just money. The guard at the door frowned when he saw Magnus. He asked, "What is your business here?" "Please inform my uncle. Tell him his nephew, Magnus Ray, needs to see him over something important," said Magnus politely. He did not dare to overstep. The guard at the door was in his 50s, and he was wearing a long robe. He frowned and said, "Hold on." He walked into the courtyard and later came out again after more than 10 minutes. He said with a nonchalant expression, "You have 10 minutes. "Thanks, Mr. Ward." Magnus looked grateful. Then he quickly instructed someone to push him in. They passed through the porch and crossed a bridge over a fish pond. Then he was pushed into a courtyard in his wheelchair. The courtyard was not huge. There was a huge pine tree at the center, consisting of 3 large trees that intertwined with each other to form the huge pine tree. Their leaves covered the entire courtyard. A man in his 50s was brewing tea under the pine tree. The moonlight seeped through the gaps of the pine tree leaves. It was quite a serene scene in the yard. "Uncle, I'm your nephew, Magnus Ray." Magnus struggled to get out of the wheelchair. The older man stirred the tea leaves in his cup. He said nonchalantly, "All right. I know what happened. You're quite an embarrassment, Uncle. She hired an expert who was so powerful that Gary couldn't defeat him. He also beat me up. This is an insult to the Rays. He's threatening your power in Zealand," Magnus whined. Chapter 493. The old man was the head of the Ray clan, Manfred Ray. He was a business big shot with $1 billion worth. He held great influence over legitimate business and the underground circles of the city. He was someone who could make anything happen in Zealand. The Ray clan had more than a century's worth of history in Zealand. Even people in high society had to stay respectful when they met Manfred Ray. The Ray clan held great power. Significant achievements have been made in various Zealand enterprise sectors such as the film and television industry, logistics, manufacturing, and much more. Manfred was a visionary as early as 10 years ago. He gave up a portion of his shares and handed them over to the Zealand municipal government. No one would dare to make a move on Zealand Enterprise that way. He made it so that the Zealand Enterprise would always remain a dominant force in Zealand. Manfred was invincible in the hearts of the people in Zealand. He was someone they could not mess with. Moreover, there was a mysterious person in the Ray clan who even made the cultivators show their respect to the Ray clan. It could be said that the Ray clan was a major power in Zealand. They were firmly established and unshakable. Manfred only chuckled when he heard about Magnus' experience. He continued to stir his tea and asked, "How do I put this nicely? You have a few achievements over the years, but you've grown arrogant." "I know I made a mistake, Uncle, but Trevor Penn and the Shandons insulted the Ray clan in front of everyone. Our clan will fall from grace if you don't help me," said Magnus. The older man sighed faintly. He said, "Yeah, it's people like you who constantly bring trouble to the Ray clan." Magnus was startled and dared not speak further. It would be the end for someone if Manfred was displeased with him. His nephew was no exception. However, the reputation of the Ray clan should not be sullied. Therefore, "We have to remedy this situation," said Manfred calmly. Magnus was overjoyed to hear that. He could hope for revenge if the head of the clan would help. However, Manfred said, "You should resign from the position of Zealand Entertainment General Manager after this. I will find someone else to replace you." "What, Uncle? But I contributed a lot to the Ray clan." "You?" Magnus instantly panicked. Manfred simply glanced at Magnus. Magnus instantly piped down and whined, "I understand, Uncle. I'll listen to your arrangements if you will restore the reputation of the Ray clan." Manfred said calmly, "There's hope for you yet. I heard Gary is a peak ambience level cultivator, right?" "Yeah, but he was defeated by Trevor Penn with one attack. He's in the emergency room right now." Magnus was still traumatized at the thought of that. Manfred frowned slightly. He said, "A peak ambience level cultivator was defeated with a single attack. What kind of cultivator do you think he is?" Magnus was taken aback. He had to be at least a pre-sanctuary level cultivator to defeat a peak ambience level cultivator. Only the previous head of the clan was a pre-sanctuary level cultivator in the Ray clan, he thought. "I think he's a pre-sanctuary level cultivator," said Magnus unconfidently. Manfred said nonchalantly, "You're lucky to be alive after messing with a pre-sanctuary level cultivator." "So, what should we do next?" Magnus felt uncertain, so his voice was as quiet as a mouse. Manfred glanced at him and shook his head helplessly. He said, "The Ray didn't make it this far with just the power of the previous head of the clan, a pre-sanctuary level cultivator. It is also because of our good relationship with Zealand's local government and its officials." Chapter 494. "Yes, of course. You have great foresight, Uncle." Magnus instantly buttered up to him. Manfred chuckled and said, "We restore the reputation where it's damaged. Invite all those people back to the same place, tomorrow at noon. The dignity of the Ray clan must not be compromised." "Uncle, are you going to ask Grandpa to help?" asked Magnus joyously. Manfred said nonchalantly, "Of course, Who else can defeat a pre-sanctuary level cultivator except for my father? Right. Grandpa has been a pre-sanctuary level cultivator for over a decade. That young man is no match for him, said Magnus furiously. Manfred laughed and said, "Let me assure you that my father is a sanctuary level cultivator. Have you heard of the saying that everything is inferior to a sanctuary level cultivator?" A sanctuary level cultivator? Magnus was instantly overjoyed. He had no cultivation talents, but he knew about the saying because he was born in a cultivation clan. A sanctuary-level cultivator was basically invincible. Magnus said with excitement, "Uncle, I can't believe my grandpa is a sanctuary-level cultivator. The end is near for Trevor Pan." Manfred said nonchalantly, "Go back and make arrangements because I'm going to enjoy my tea." "Yes, Uncle. I'll stay up tonight to make the necessary arrangements. I promise everyone will be there." Magnus bowed, and then he was pushed away in his wheelchair. Manfred tasted his tea after Magnus left. He smiled and said, "A nice cup of tea depends on the right temperature. This is the right time to punish the Shandons, and it's also the perfect moment for the Ray clan to establish cultivation dominance in Zealand." Manfred smiled and put his cup down. With a wave, his butler, Liam Ray, walked over. He bowed and asked, "How may I help you, sir?" "Call Mayor Mitchell. Have him deploy special agents and declare martial law at the Caesar Hotel tomorrow. Tell him that the Ray clan has important matters to deal with there," replied Manfred. Liam nodded and said, "Yes, sir." With that, he bowed and left. Manfred smiled gently. He wanted everyone to know the terrifying power of the Ray clan tomorrow, and he also wanted them to know the extent of their influence on the Zealand authorities. Then, he sat quietly for a moment before standing up slowly. He passed through the house and came to a cabin in the backyard. The door of the cabin was wide open, so he could see the children playing joyously inside. A laughter from an elder could also be heard from time to time. Manfred smiled. He stood at the door and bowed. He said, "Father, I wish to see you." "What is it? Can't you see I'm playing with the children?" He sounded a bit annoyed. However, Manfred did not mind. The children were the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren of his father. His father called all his grandchildren to the cabin as soon as he came back. They had a great time, and they hardly ever left the cabin. That was probably what people called a cross-generational bond. Manfred bowed again and said, "Father, your grandson was badly injured over some conflict. The opponent is a pre-sanctuary level cultivator. No one can defeat him in the Ray clan except for you. I didn't came back to fight for you punks. I'm going back to cultivating in solitude right away after I check on my grandchildren." Manfred frowned and said, "Father, it's not easy for the Ray clan to get to where it is today. Everyone made a lot of effort so you could cultivate in peace. If you don't help us, the reputation of the Ray clan will be tarnished. I'm afraid they'll take advantage of us." His father fell silent in the cabin for a long while before he said, "I understand, but this is the only time I'll help. There won't be a next time." "Thanks, Father. I'll leave you to your grandchildren then." Manfred made a satisfied smile, offering one final bow before he left. Chapter 495. It was early in the afternoon. Wilbur and the Shandon siblings received a call from Magnus. Wilbur laughed after he hung up and said, "It seems like Magnus Ray isn't giving up. He called the same people from yesterday, and he said the head of the Ray clan will resolve this issue. I'm afraid he has some tricks up his sleeve," Dom said with a frown. Sammy asked, "Is this a setup?" "Who cares if it's a setup? We'll just go along with it," said Wilbur nonchalantly. The siblings had faith in Wilbur and his capabilities, so they nodded and prepared to show up on time. The Caesar Hotel was strictly guarded at the moment, yet it was crowded. Special agents with loaded weapons surrounded the hotel. The security was very serious. Every journalist and business figure had to be identified by the Ray clan's receptionists before they were allowed entry. Everyone was displeased at first. However, they heard that the head of the Ray clan, Manfred Ray, and the previous head of the clan, Chester Ray, would appear. Those two were going to resolve the conflict with the Shandons, and they had an announcement to make. The displeasure instantly faded for everyone when they heard the news. It was a rare occasion for the two heads of the Ray clan to appear at the same time. Moreover, The Ray clan was at a disadvantage during their conflict with the Shandons just a day ago. The Ray clan was far more powerful than the Shandons. It was humiliating for the Ray clan to be at a disadvantage under the circumstances of a nationwide live broadcast. It seemed like they were planning to restore their reputation. More importantly, it was rumored that the previous head of the Ray clan, Chester Ray, was a cultivator. His cultivation level was a mystery. Not a lot of people believed it, but it could be a nice headline for their news. Some of the business big shots knew that it was the truth. Moreover, according to secret rumors, Chester Ray became a powerful sanctuary-level cultivator. It was shocking news to them. A sanctuary-level cultivator could be considered the pinnacle of human power. Even nations took them very seriously. Whichever clan had a sanctuary-level cultivator would have their status elevated to new heights. They would gain dominance, and no one would dare provoke them. The Ray clan was powerful enough as things were. The big shots were starting to worry because it was rumored that the Ray clan had a sanctuary-level cultivator. There were no empty seats in the banquet hall, and it was more crowded than the previous day. The head of the Ray clan, the CEO of Zealand Enterprise, Manfred Ray, was sitting at the center of the front row. Next to him were a few board members of the Ray clan. They were all key members of the Ray clan. Magnus Ray, who was still in casts, was sitting at the end of the front row. He was only an intermediate member of the Ray clan, so he was not qualified to sit at the center. Rhea was feeling smug again. She sat next to Magnus and looked down on everyone with arrogance. She wanted to restore her reputation, and she wanted to sue Sammy for defamation against Zealand Enterprise. She knew that she was the one who defamed Sammy. However, the Ray clan was on the move, and they also hired special agents. She heard that a sanctuary-level cultivator in the Ray clan was also going to appear. She did not know what a powerful sanctuary-level cultivator meant specifically. However, she knew that Trevor Penn and that little bitch, Sammy Shandon, was going to die soon. From the looks of the situation, Dawn was going to face certain death too. She wanted revenge for the humiliation she endured the day before. She could never forget about how Sammy looked when she left the press conference. Rhea never felt that she had done anything wrong. She never reflected on her behavior. Everyone looked around. The banquet hall was surrounded by security guards, and also over 100 armed special agents. Everyone who should have been there had arrived. Chapter 496. Only the Shandons and Chester Ray have yet to show up. Some of the big shots did not care about the conflict between the Ray clan and the Shandons. They cared about whether Chester Ray had become a sanctuary-level cultivator. They wondered what their next step of action would be if Chester turned out to be a sanctuary-level cultivator. It was almost 12 o'clock. Suddenly, someone announced at the entrance of the banquet hall, Dom Shandon and Sammy Shandon have arrived. Here they come. Everyone and all cameras were fixated on the door. They saw Dom and Sammy walk in, and right behind them was the mysterious man from the day before, Trevor Penn. Lights flashed and the crowd was staring. The three of them calmly entered the hall and were led next to the podium. Magnus scoffed and said, "Trevor Penn, I wonder if you dare to be so arrogant today." "That's right. You shouldn't mess with the Ray clan. Look around. Have you ever seen anything like this in your life?" Rhea yelled impatiently. She was waiting for the cameras to point at her. Wilbur shook his head and chuckled, saying, "You people are so forgetful. Your wounds have yet to heal, but you already forgot how painful it was." Magnus almost choked when he heard that. He gasped for air and then looked at Manfred, saying, "This guy is too arrogant. You must punish him harshly." "Yes, punish him. You must teach him a good lesson," Rhea kept yelling along. Manfred looked at them with disgust. Then, he looked at Wilbur and said slowly, "Trevor Penn, a pre-sanctuary-level cultivator, why haven't I heard about you before?" "I'm unwilling to show my face in public," replied Wilbur nonchalantly. Manfred smiled and nodded. He said, "The Shandons are quite impressive to have your help." "I'll always lend a helping hand when I see injustice," said Wilbur. Manfred looked displeased. He said, "I don't want to keep talking about what happened yesterday. You injured Magnus Ray and Gary. Don't you think it's fair that I demand a settlement from you?" Wilbur laughed and asked, "A settlement? Did you provide the Shandons any compensation when your people abducted Dom Shandon?" Manfred said in a low voice, "We didn't abduct him. We merely invited him to stay and discuss matters. Well said. You're truly worthy of being the head of the clan, he chuckled. Manfred frowned and said, Stop this foolish banter. You have to apologize and compensate for this incident. Otherwise, we won't show you any mercy. Not showing me mercy? Wilbur sneered coldly before he asked, How do you plan to do that? Manfred stood slowly and said in a serious tone, Don't you dare act so boldly just because you're a pre-sanctuary level cultivator. What about it? Wilbur responded rudely. Manfred scoffed coldly. He bowed and said loudly, All members of the Ray clan, please humbly welcome our sanctuary-level cultivator, the Elder of the Ray clan. Greetings to the sanctuary-level cultivator, the Elder of the Ray clan. Every Ray clan member stood and welcomed Chester Ray. All the cameras and gazes were instantly fixated on the stage. Everyone wanted to know what a sanctuary-level cultivator looked like. However, some of the big shots were terrified. It would seem that Chester Ray did become a sanctuary-level cultivator. It was a fact. So from that day forward, the power structure of Zealand was likely to be disrupted once again, and conflicts would arise. Suddenly, an elder with white hair came out from the stage. He was wearing a green robe, and he walked out slowly. Everyone was instantly disappointed. That's the sanctuary-level cultivator. He doesn't look like anything special, they thought. However, some big shots stood up solemnly and bowed to the elder. The elder glanced at everyone. An unseen force suddenly emerged from him. They could not believe their eyes when they saw an iridescent light appear on top of the elder with clouds surrounding him. Everyone was very shocked. Chapter 497. How is this happening indoors? Could it be that the power of a sanctuary-level cultivator enabled him to generate iridescent light and clouds? They wondered. Chester looked at their shocked faces. It was hard for every Ray clan member to hide their smiles. The sanctuary-level cultivator barely had to do anything to shock them all. The mortals had no idea how terrifying the true power of a sanctuary-level cultivator could be. Manfred carried a golden armchair made from rare wood to the center of the stage amidst the astonishment of the crowd. He welcomed Chester to sit. Manfred looked at Wilbur and asked slowly, Mr. Penn, do you still think you have anything to be proud of? Wilbur glanced at Chester and showed him a creepy smile. Chester also glanced at Wilbur, but he quickly ignored him. He was there to help the Ray clan. He did not want the reputation of the Ray clan to be tarnished after all. However, he would return to seclusion as soon as it was over. His lofty aspirations and ambitions of conquering the world after he became a sanctuary-level cultivator had been extinguished after a battle on the mountaintop, where he was defeated by a terrifying young man. Wilbur smiled gently at that moment. He said, Being a sanctuary-level cultivator is not that impressive. You don't need to try to scare me. Manfred could not believe his ears when he said that. How dare he act so arrogant in front of a sanctuary-level cultivator? Is he an idiot or too ignorant to feel fear? Manfred thought. What did you say? Asked Manfred with disbelief. Wilbur replied, Being a sanctuary-level cultivator is not that impressive. Wow, you sure are reckless. How dare you disrespect my clan's elder who is a sanctuary-level cultivator? Sir, hurry up and punish this outrageous guy, yelled Manfred angrily. Rhea was also agitated on the side, shouting, He doesn't respect the Ray clan at all. You'll be humiliated if you don't teach him a lesson. Wilbur chuckled and shook his head. Some people just want to see the world burn, he thought. Manfred bowed at Chester and said, Father, you see how stubborn this young man is. He's still outrageous in front of you. You need to teach him a lesson. Chester shook his head helplessly. He looked at Wilbur and said, You should apologize, young man. We can forget about the compensation. I'll be calling the shots for this. Chester was being noble. Magnus was clearly upset, but he did not dare to say anything. He only glared at Wilbur. Rhea was fed up. She insulted Chester on the side. I don't think this sanctuary-level cultivator is that impressive. Rhea knew that there was no way she could be successful again if Trevor Penn and the Shandong siblings were not punished. Therefore, she started to be reckless, so that she could seek revenge. She wanted to agitate Chester so that he would kill Trevor Penn and the Shandong siblings. That would be amazing for her. Shut up, yelled Manfred instantly when he heard that. Rhea scoffed and turned her head to the side. Everyone gradually snapped out, being shocked by the power of the sanctuary-level cultivator. They also looked forward to how Chester would punish the arrogant young man. Trevor Penn seemed to be absolutely reckless given his age and status in front of the Ray clan, after all. However, Wilbur chuckled and said, "What a small world. An apology is certain, but the Ray clan is the one who needs to apologize. Got it?" Wilbur instantly enraged the Ray clan. The journalists and businessmen also looked surprised. How is this guy so fearless? They wondered. Chapter 498. What Wilbur said finally enraged Chester. He initially wanted to end the conflict with his status. He thought he could casually say a few words and brush the matter aside. His focus was no longer on mortal matters anymore. However, the young man spoke too arrogantly, even though he knew that he was a sanctuary-level cultivator. He frowned slightly as he looked at Wilbur. He said, "The way you talk is forcing my hands to teach you a lesson." Every Ray clan member was instantly overjoyed. They were all looking at Wilbur like he was a dead man walking. Everything is inferior to a sanctuary-level cultivator. This guy won't live if our elder attacks, they thought. Every camera and gaze were focused on Wilbur. The crowd, along with countless netizens nationwide, watched how Wilbur would react. Chester stood as he spoke. There was an unseen spiritual pressure that was emitted from his body, and it spread throughout the banquet hall. Everyone was stunned and terrified by the immense power. An invincible expert really exists. This young man is doomed for sure, they thought. Suddenly, Wilbur chuckled and said, "Senior, your Wrath of Spear left quite an impression on me. It was amazing." "So, it's you, Senior." Chester finally came to a realization at that exact moment. Trevor Penn was the young man who defeated him back then. However, he was confused as to why his appearance was different. He pondered for a moment and had a sudden realization. Someone like Wilbur would not want to show his face in public. It was normal for him to change his appearance. Chester was more than shocked. He hurriedly approached him and bowed. He said, "I didn't know it was you, sir. I'm sorry for offending you. Please forgive me, sir." What Chester did and what he said shocked everyone. "Father, what are you doing?" "Grandpa, who the hell is he? I can't believe you're bowing at him. What's going on? Why did Chester Ray bow to someone younger than him? What's happening? Why did a sanctuary-level cultivator bow to someone like him?" The banquet hall was buzzing at the moment. Everyone was engaged in discourse amidst being shocked. The streaming platforms were going crazy with comments. Everyone was wondering who the hell Trevor Penn was and how he managed to do that. Wilbur smiled and said, "No need for formalities. The Shandons had some conflict with the Ray clan. I have connections with them, so I came forward to mediate. But I didn't expect it would involve you. This is my fault for not educating my son properly, sir. I'll make them apologize and compensate right away. Feel free to make any additional requests." Chester yelled at Manfred in a strict tone after he said that. "You useless thing. How can you offend someone like him? Apologize immediately or I'll kill you myself if he doesn't forgive you." Manfred was clearly confused as to why his father yelled at him. He looked so lost, like he had no idea what was happening. "What are you standing around for? Hurry up and apologize," Chester yelled impatiently. Manfred was startled. Magnus was dumbfounded with his mouth agape. Rhea, too, could not believe her eyes. She looked at Wilbur in a stupor as though she saw a ghost. It was dead silent. Everyone was very surprised. They were shocked and in disbelief. How did the Ray clan sanctuary-level cultivator switch sides out of nowhere and start to blame his own people? They wondered. Chapter 499. Chester noticed the stupor his son was in, so he kicked Manfred to the floor. Then, he bowed at Wilbur and said, "Please forgive these mortals, sir. I'll bear the responsibility for everything." Chester knew just how terrifying Wilbur was. The Ray clan could not deal with the consequences if Wilbur was offended. He could eradicate the whole clan overnight, and no one could do anything about it. It was like his current self. He was capable of dominating the world as long as he did not encounter someone like Wilbur, and no one could stop him. The higher he advanced in his cultivation, the more he understood how terrifying Wilbur was. That was why Chester did not need to inquire about the reasons. He simply apologized and tried to make amends. Wilbur said, "It's not a big deal. Let the journalists and other unrelated people leave and let Magnus Ray apologize to the Shandong siblings. We will forget about this." Wilbur did not want to dwell on the matter too much for Chester's sake. Chester hurriedly said, "Yes, sir. I will follow your instructions on this matter." Manfred finally snapped out of it. He looked at Chester and scolded, "Father, who is he to you? Are you trying to ruin the Ray clan by doing this?" He arranged a grand setup that flopped in the end. It was an extremely embarrassing conclusion, so he could not accept it. Moreover, he could not understand why his father was so respectful toward Trevor Penn when he was a sanctuary-level cultivator. Is he out of his mind from all the cultivation? Manfred wondered. Chester burst into a fit of rage immediately. He slapped his ungrateful son in the face, causing Manfred to spit out blood, along with a few teeth. "You trash! Do you know who you're talking to? Even I have to address him respectfully. Who do you think you are?" Chester was trying to remind his son that Wilbur was not someone he could mess with. He warned him to stop being stubborn. However, Manfred was losing his mind, so he would not give it a rest. He glared at his father and said angrily, "I'll do it myself if you won't help the Ray clan, Chief Peterson." Manfred yelled angrily. The captain of the Special Forces Squad, Zane Peterson, walked over in stride. Manfred said in a furious and trembling voice, "Trevor Penn assaulted my family, and he defamed Zealand Enterprise. Arrest him for the relevant authorities to handle." "Yes, sir." Zane received an order to assist the Ray clan. He would accept instruction from Manfred Ray when it was necessary. Manfred was the second person in charge in Zealand, and he gave him a direct order. Therefore, Zane carried out his order. He quickly gestured in a wave, and his officers ran over to surround Wilbur. Zane said in a low voice, "Mr. Penn, you are now a suspect of assault and defamation. Please follow us back for investigation. We hope you can cooperate with us." The journalists were fired up again. It was impressive that the young man could make Chester cave in. However, they wondered if he dared to act so arrogantly against the authorities. Magnus had a sinister smile on his face at that moment. So what if he can fight? He still has to comply with the authorities, right? He will be in jail if he dares to fight back. The power of a nation was not something a cultivator could go against. Otherwise, the nation would have been dominated by cultivators a long time ago, Magnus thought. Rhea screamed on the side, "Hurry up and arrest him. He killed someone yesterday. I saw it myself, and I can be a witness." Chapter 500. Everyone was caught by surprise once again. Wow! Why didn't we know about what happened yesterday? They thought. However, every Ray clan member knew about that because Gary was still in the hospital. It was unknown whether he was still alive. It would not be an exaggeration to say Wilbur killed someone. Zane said, "You heard her. Someone accused you of murder too, so please cooperate with us. Don't make us use forceful measures." Rhea had a satisfied smile on her face. The Shandong siblings would be nothing without Trevor Penn. Magnus looked sinister. He paid a huge price for the incident, so he would rather die than see Trevor and the Shandong siblings walk off unpunished. Manfred looked grudgeful. He needed to teach that asshole a lesson, even if he had to use everything the Ray clan had. Otherwise, he could never show his face in Zealand again as the head of the clan. Sammy and Dom were also nervous. Wilbur was powerful, but he probably could not fight the authorities. Are we going to watch him get arrested? They wondered. The siblings looked at each other and decided that they would do everything it takes to rescue Wilbur if Zane were to arrest him, even if they had to use every dollar from their family. However, Wilbur told Zane, "I'm afraid you're not qualified to arrest me. You can't do anything you want just because you can fight, young man. Not complying with local authorities has serious consequences." The special agents pointed their weapons at Wilbur when Zane said that. Zane also revealed a pair of handcuffs. Everyone held their breaths and stayed focused. They waited for Wilbur to respond. Will he comply or fight back with force? Either way, it's going to be extremely interesting, they thought. Members of the Ray clan were smiling victoriously. They praised Manfred's decision to maintain a good cooperative relationship with the authorities. It played a decisive role in a crucial moment. Rhea was so glad that she laughed on the side. She felt like Sammy tried her best but failed in the end. She thought that victory was hers. Suddenly, Wilbur flipped his palm. Zane and the others were nervous. However, only an identification card appeared on his palm. Wilbur passed the identification card to Zane. He smiled and said, "Take a close look before you make a decision." Zane took the identification card puzzlingly. He was shocked when he saw the contents. Zealand was a direct-administered city, and it was not an ordinary place. The person in charge of Zealand was someone on the national level. Therefore, Zane was not an ordinary captain of a special forces squad. It was why he was aware of the Department of Paranormal Research and Defense. It was a mysterious and powerful department. They could give direct orders to the person in charge of Zealand, let alone Zane. Aside from the security department of the Department of Paranormal Research and Defense, no one was authorized to arrest a member of the Department of Paranormal Research and Defense. Wilbur's ranking in the government was much higher than Zane's. Zane passed back the identification card cautiously with both hands. He said in a respectful tone, "My apologies. I'm not authorized to arrest you." That caused a buzzing commotion in the hall. Who the hell is this godly figure? Are the authorities not going to get involved when he's a suspect for murder? They wondered. The crowd erupted in chaos, and the streaming platforms were fired up. Every Rayclan member looked like they were in despair and in disbelief. Manfred, Magnus, and Rhea were all dumbfounded. The Chandon siblings also looked surprised. "Isn't he too terrifying? I can't believe the Zealand authorities are bowing to him in respect," they thought. Wilbur said coldly, "Zane Peterson, there's nothing for you to do here. Send your men back and write up a report when you return. Submit it to our headquarters." "Yes, sir, boys, we're going back." Zane gave his order and led his officers away from the scene quickly. They were gone in the blink of an eye. Everyone was looking at Wilbur in bewilderment. The entire process felt so unreal and unbelievable.